My name is Ann Lee, and I'm here with Somerville artist Jodi Colella, whom I met several years ago when working on a three-part book series called Artistry and Fiber. And she was one of the artists that I chose to be in the sculpture volume. And at the time, I was really impressed with her passion, with her ability to connect with different people, and her desire to, no pun intended, thread different issues together and present them to the public. Jodi and I have continued to be in touch, and I was thrilled to have her be a part of this collaborative effort at Cary Library. Jodi has a BA in biology from Boston University and attended the certificate program for graphic design at Mass College of Art and Design. She also studied at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts and the Art Institute of Boston. She was a founder of Colella Graphic Design and now teaches fiber arts and materials workshops, both locally and nationally. So it's a pleasure to have you here to talk about our collaborative event at Cary Library. And I guess I'll start at the beginning. I defined you as a fiber artist, but how would you define yourself as an artist?
I consider myself a sculptor who uses soft materials because I like to work dimensionally mostly. But I'm also it has been brought to my attention lately that I'm also a relational aesthetic artist. And that's a new form since the 90s apparently, that it's about art that is about connecting people and the experiences that happen to be between people. That's primary, and then the material object is secondary. It's sort of the vehicle. So I'm sort of here as the, facilitator person to pull together a community and enhance their experiences with each other.
And you yourself as a child, do you remember your first experiences with this kind of process, with either the sculptural process or the fiber process?
Well, there's a couple. One when I was 5. I come from a family of women who always knit. And my mother, aunt, grandmother, that sort of was a major pivot point of their relationship, was the knitting that they did together. And we also summered down the Cape. So that was a big place that it happened. And I remember I couldn't even read yet, but I wanted to be a part of that, and I wanted to learn how to knit. So my mother handed me a book that had diagrams, and I taught myself how to knit. Of course, that was just the basics, and it took many years of their pedagogy to help me really know how to knit. But that was, I remember that clearly. And then later on in high school, I was assigned a drawing project and didn't have the materials or resources to pull it off. But I did have this bag of scraps in my basement from my father's mother, who was a quilter. So I pulled together these scraps and illustrated a sort of scene, and was scared to death to submit it. And as it turned out, it was received so well. It kind of opened my eyes to how material is a relevant tool that you can use.
And your whole experience with your family was one of collaboration and connection and community.
And not just my family, but our whole neighborhood on this beach. We would swim all day, start shivering, sit on the hot rocks, and knit. And some of us would be using pencils for needles, and we had the plastic Wonder Bread bags to put our knitting in as our knitting bags. And so that whole experience was a big part of me too.
And it's no accident that so many words around fiber have to do with connection, like threading together, binding together, weaving. Yeah. So after high school, you go to college, but you studied science. And I'm curious, you put that on hold, and I'm curious how that interest in science has informed you, if at all, in your practice now.
Science was my second love, particularly cellular biology, and I was fascinated by the systems that would happen within cells. And they almost serve as metaphor, so the micro versus macro. And that's really what caught my attention. So when I came back to creating fine art, particularly sculpture, that's what I sort of tapped into.
So what was that first piece that you created, and how did the cellular aspect of it come to play?
Well, one of my first pieces was a large, what I like to call a cutwork embroidery, but it's not really. And it was 6 feet by 9 feet. It's called Undercurrent. And it was layers of aluminum screen that I cut away and embroidered with wire. And it looks either like a flowing river or a bloodstream, depending on your perspective.
And how was that received? And
Very
where
well.
did you present it?
I was invited to participate in a show at Newton Art Center. The curator was Denise Driscoll, and the name of it was Material Matters. And she brought together a few of us who were using unexpected materials in new ways. And it was received very well. It sort of gave me a lot of encouragement to continue.
So you've alluded to using different materials in your projects. How do you choose what to use? Does the material inform the piece, or is it the other way around?
Of course, there are times where the material informs the piece if there's something you have in mind. But with inspiration, oftentimes, well, actually what I want to say is the piece informs the material when you have a goal in mind. But what happens with inspiration is the material tells me what to do. So I'll start with the material and respond to its qualities and try to pull out in what it has the capacity to express.
Can you give me an example?
Well, again, undercurrent.
Okay.
Because the aluminum screen is woven like a fabric, but it's wire. So you can treat it as a woven interlocking fiber when you're separating it and unraveling it, but you can also take advantage of its ability to maintain a shape if you bend it there. So that was one. Another one, I have a series called Seeds or Blasts, and those look like little micromorphic growing cellular things. And there I was using needle felting and felt, and the capacity of the felt to contract where I wanted it to create the shapes that look like that.
So tell me what a typical day in the studio would be like for you. I'm assuming you've already found your materials, and I have to ask where you find them. Then what happens?
This is a tough one to answer because I don't have like a typical day. I'm often working on several projects at the same time, and I'm also receiving inspiration from several different objects that I might be paying attention to in a particular day or not. But if I have something in mind, for instance, a project that I am engaged in actively that has a proposed exhibition date, or I already have in mind what it is I'm trying to express, so I'll put in my earplugs, I'll listen to a book, or the news or something, and just get into my space where I either do the work of making multiples, and each time I'm doing that, sort of like knitting, it's meditative, and I'm sort of ruminating on the reason why I'm doing it. or I get to work of just playing with the materials and seeing where it goes and just responding.
And are those found materials, recycled materials, repurposed? Where do they all come from?
I work with a lot of found materials that I look for at flea markets and yard sales or trash day. I mean,
Dumpster
honest,
diving.
Yes, yeah. And I've learned to respond, to listen to myself when I have a reaction to something and I don't know why. Like with my Mary Janes, something sparked me when I saw a particular little figurine, and I sat it on my desk at the studio for a while, and then one day it just happened, what I needed to do, and then I realized why. And that by realizing why, or beginning to realize why, it guided me in where I wanted to bring it.
And where was that?
To a more extreme expression of what it means to be a Mary Jane.
Tell me more.
Well, that's a series of work where I take found figurines that it started out and mostly contains young girls wearing Mary Jane shoes. And the original figurines I was responding to just happened to be wearing Mary Janes. Of course, that was working subliminally, and I didn't know why at the moment. So after creating a few, and I was able to observe that commonality, I realized this is what it's about. You know, I was born mid-20th century. These Mary Janes had a very strong symbol in my life as a young woman. And I found that by wrapping them up in this shape of a yarn ball, which is another domestic symbol, I was expressing my ideas about being voiceless or muted, and combination of oppression and expression. And that's what that's all about.
So you're touching on feminism here.
I know.
And very appropriately. And I'm wondering how else in your works you express and explore that side.
You know, it's so great when you have a certain number of years under your belt and then you can do a personal retrospect where you can look at things. Like recently I put a few photos of things on my dining room table, and all of a sudden something screamed out at me that I wasn't totally aware of. So it comes as a surprise to me that I am a feminist artist. I don't know why, but I'm just, not recently, but in the past it came as a surprise to me. And it's my experience as a woman, daughter, wife, mother, and that's what I draw upon. And so I come at it as who I am, but I think a lot of these feelings and issues are applicable to anyone who feels marginalized or outside or misunderstood or any number of things.
Let's turn a little bit towards some of your collaborative projects. You alluded a little bit to why they're so important to you as an artist. And can you talk a little bit about that and also describe some of your early collaborative projects?
There's a joy that comes from sharing your values about art, sharing your love of it and witnessing connections made from other people who maybe haven't had much experience with it or don't have had it but not much opportunity, and then watching them come together and then leaving as a whole. So they come as individuals and then they leave as a group. And I teach a lot, and I find in the classes where I teach over a long period of time that often what happens is I don't even need to be there anymore, which is a great feeling. I'll say sometimes, I'm going to go get a coffee, I'll see you later, because they sort of have made their own support system. And
it's taken a life of its own.
Yes, exactly. And So I find a lot of value in that. I think a lot of it has to do with the times that we're in and have been in. There are some activist artists, Sharon Downey, for instance, who does Badass Cross Stitch, that's her company, and her motto is put more analog into your digital. So, there's a lot of generations after me who are coming back to the craft because they need to make that connection. And so they're making the connection to themselves, to contemplation, to haptic experiences, to each other, to history. And I feel like collaborations like this, again with the idea of relational aesthetics, provides the environment for that to happen.
So when you were approached by Cary Library to work on this project, it seems like the collaborative aspect was a huge piece of what you wanted to do. And we spent a lot of time brainstorming and coming up with different ideas. So what first sparked your interest in this project?
Well, I don't know if you remember that first meeting, but we sat here and we started discussing opportunities. And the idea of collaboration came up. And I remember saying to you, this idea I have because I've become rooted in all the writings of fashion revolution and how mending is an act of compassion and how I would love to be able to explore that. And I was so happy to find that this was an opportunity to do that. So it was some of my recent readings that influenced me, plus the desires and openness of what the library wanted to do with its community.
And that's very much the theme for the library this year, is the whole community connection and getting people to not be isolated pods, but to come together with a project in mind. And you've called this project Full Circle. Tell us why that title.
Oh, there's so many meanings to that. It sort of happened organically, but I am thinking about political issues having to do with fast fashion and exploitation, ecological concerns about the immense amount of waste that ends up in landfills and hurts the earth, and then social issues having to do with mending, compassion, repair. And the big picture of recycling down. Downcycling, I can't remember the exact term. Upcycling. That's what it is. Okay. Where we make new relationships with our things instead of making things. We take resources from the earth, we process them, and then we interrupt the cycle by throwing them in a landfill that never decomposes because of the materials and the immensity of them and what they're made of. So the object of this is to continue this circle, to honor our clothes, earth, other people who are being exploited to provide the West with these fast fashions, and just to keep things going.
Do you have any statistics about that kind of waste?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to refer to this because I'm very bad with numbers. But the research states that there's 100 billion garments manufactured annually, and 26 million pounds of them, I had to read all the zeros, end up in landfills. Each individual is responsible for 81 pounds of clothing that they throw away, not what they own. Every year. So it's these sorts of numbers that impacted me when I was doing some research for this.
And when I think of Full Circle, I'm also thinking of the earth.
That's right.
Our Mother Earth.
Mother Earth.
Yeah.
There's no mistake why we're using a circular form. Also, in more pragmatic terms, the plan is to rotate our Earth here to be able to reach all facets of it and have access to mend every bit of it. And that will make a full circle before the end of our time here.
Okay, So we should probably talk about the project that you're doing here, Full Circle, and explain how it's actually going to work. What are people going to find when they arrive here at the Idea Wall?
On a regular library day, this will be here, accessible to anyone who visits, with all of the materials. And they are invited to sit and mend, sew and attach any one of the scraps which are repurposed from clothing that have been outsourced to these places where the clothing ends up when they're not sold. And or they can sit and embroider on their laps. With the goal is to have them interact with each other. We're bringing together people who don't know each other, and they'll be able to sit and be participating in a common activity. Also provide a forum for us to be able to discuss the issues at hand, some of the things we just talked about, you and I, and bring craft into a sphere where it allows people to have this sort of personal competence feeling that they're doing something, and hopefully get them to continue in their private lives when they leave here. We're going to have mending circles. There's scheduled several of them. They're on the program. I'm going to be here facilitating those on those days. Plus there's other programming going on that's fantastic. But during the mending circles, I'm just here to help people do what they want to do. There is no wrong way of doing anything. In fact, the goal is to have as many individual voices up here as possible. And if it fills, then we're going to go on top of it. And we're going to keep adding. It's going to be an aggregate of who we are here in this community. Hi, my name's Jodi Colella. I'm the artist in residence at Cary Memorial Library. I'm here today at the Idea Wall to introduce you to the latest public art project called Full Circle. You are invited to join us in this public art event by mending and sewing and adding your own contributions to this larger-than-life embroidery hoop. Anything can be applied to this hoop. In fact, we encourage all personal statements, text, imagery, fabrics, artifacts, whatever it is you want to contribute to this bigger piece of that represents the community is really encouraged. You can work on smaller pieces in your lap and then apply those to the wall. Or you could take some of the clothing that we're providing that's repurposed into smaller patches and apply that to the wall directly. And I can give you a little demo on how to apply something to the wall. You can pin your object, have one of the provided needles and a thimble and some thread, and just stitch one stitch at a time, attaching your piece to the pieces underneath. And that's it. I'm looking forward to seeing all the different voices that will come together when this piece evolves. Thanks.
And I think one of the points is to understand that it doesn't need to be perfect. And you
Not at all.
mentioned that. There's no right way to do it. And
It's about the process, it's about the relations, it's about sharing information about issues, and the craft.
And that's what you hope to bring out of this, get out of this. Do you have works hanging here at Cary that people can see a different side of you?
Yes, I'm very excited to be exhibiting in the Piper Gallery. The show's called Obstructed View, and in it you'll see a few of my Mary Jane sculptures, as well as some tin types that I've embroidered. Smaller ones that I found that are actual tin types from the 19th century that I found are found objects, and then larger ones that I've created as sort of monster versions of those little ones, but it was a reproductive process I had to develop to do so. It all started with the smaller tintypes because I was asked to respond to a collection at a museum in Northampton called Historic Northampton. And I was going through the daguerreotypes, and they have an amazing archive of all sorts of things of the Pioneer Valley. And in the catalog of daguerreotypes, all the men had every bit of data about who they were, where they lived, where they worked, who they married, how many kids, what their hobbies were, you name it. And about 80% of the women, unidentified women. And so that's what sort of sparked the name of that show and inspired me to find my own unidentified women. You know, when you go to the flea markets and there's that old dusty shoebox and they're in there and someone got it from an estate sale, no one knows who they are anymore. So I found the ones that seemed compelling to me and embellished them with an embroidery to sort of either make them invisible or more visible, give them a voice. Embroidery, of course, is a feminist act. And so that's what that Unidentified Woman series is about. And that's what inspired me to go larger and expand the theme about identity and who is it we are really looking at in these photos.
Oh, that'll be fascinating. And how long is that up for?
Till the end of February.
Wonderful, wonderful. So this is a project using needle and thread. In the vastness of contemporary art, where do you see the needle arts or the fiber arts making a difference? And how will they be making a difference?
You're right. It is such a vast category. I mean, you had 3 books on it, right?
Yes. And could have done
exactly
many, many more.
How do you choose? I mean, starting with the second wave feminists, Lenore Tawney and Sheila Hicks, and trying to make formal, massive sculptures in response to the patriarchy of the art world at the time. And everything right up through to now, which we have a lot of young artists who are using craft as activism. And so I find that art, and particularly craft, has a unique perspective. It provides a gateway for people to understand concepts. It provides a gateway for artists to express ideas and have it be read and felt by the public. And it also provides, it can be used as an implement of socio-political issues to, help make change. There's a whole movement of craft dissidents now that I'm a big fan of.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us more about that?
Oh, well, I talked a little bit about Sharon Downey.
Yes.
And she does cross stitch and the analog. We need more analog than digital in our life. Then there's also a young woman in the UK, Sarah Corbett. And she wrote a book called Craftivism. And her whole premise is if we want to surround ourselves with beautiful, hopeful things, then why can't our protest be beautiful and hopeful? She grew up as a child of ministers who were very politically active, and she spent a lot of her youth in picket lines and protesting, and had an aha moment one day when she felt like it was a very violent act, what she was doing, and thought there must be a better way. So she is using cross-stitch to create statements politically. She'll cross-stitch a political statement on a mask and put it on a patriarchal statue in London. She, in one particular case, there was some sort of political dinner, and she and her cohorts embroidered sayings of political import on napkins and handed them out at the dinner, and was told afterwards that it had effective change on their perspective on how to approach this particular subject, because there's a non-aggressive, soft way of getting across, although it's not soft, it's edgy.
It's edgy, but it's done in a soft material.
Yes.
Which kind of, that paradox
I think
makes
it catches
really
people
powerful.
by surprise.
Yeah.
You know, even the suffragettes, There were some who felt like knitting kept them in the domestic sphere, and there were others who felt like it provided them with a way to be in the presence of discussion without being threatening. So there's many ways to look at it.
Yeah, no, it's political yarn bombing.
Yeah.
A whole new approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's next for you? Once Full Circle closes, where are you going to go?
Well,
what are you going to do?
I'm looking for, I am participating in other social justice, and if I'm allowed to talk about that, one is at a girls' Catholic school called Malden Co-Divisional High School, and I'm working with 80 sophomores, and they have a winter term where they study social justice issues, and I'm going to be stitching with them, giving them voice and accessibility to ways of expressing whatever their chosen issue happens to be. I'm doing that next week, actually.
No rest for the weary.
And also have a piece at the Fuller Craft Museum on a very important subject. The show is called Human Impact, Stories of the Opioid Epidemic, and 11 of us were chosen to meet with families and translate the stories behind the tragic losses. And my piece is called Once Was, inspired by a poem of the mother I met, single mother of a boy who lost his life. And my memorial is 12 feet tall and contains 3,600 remembrance poppies, and each one representing 200,000 deaths since 1999.
That's really powerful.
So even though that wasn't so much a collaborative of many, I did have access to talking with many people about it, and they provided me with donated clothing that I could use to create these remembrance poppies. So that's another thing that's going on.
Don't walk to that exhibit. Yeah.
It's a great one. There's the other work is fascinating as well.
Great.
So, and I have a solo show coming up at Boston Sculptors in April. I'm teaching in Greece and in Australia, and I'm looking forward to getting back to this conceptual side of the studio soon.
And I'm sure people are looking forward to meeting you here.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm sure people are looking forward to dropping in on some of the mending circles and meeting with
I
you
am so
and
excited
working
for this,
with
yes.
you. So I hope people will also come to the opening reception, which is on Monday evening at 7 p.m. And thank you for spending time with us and telling us about your project.
Well, thank you, and I'm so looking forward to meeting the community in the mending circles. We have several scheduled, to the opening, sharing what I like to do, seeing what they do, and then watching this evolve as we revolve full circle with it.
Beautifully said. Thank you.